Hello, everybody. It's Romania Black. We're on episode 4 of Violet Evergarden, and the last 3 episodes have been all really super somber and low key, but developing this character of Violet. And I really, really like how Violet is slowly influencing the people around her. We see that with Erica. We see that with Luculia, the girl that she meets in episode 3, and her brother. And you can just see that Violet is this positive force in these people's lives, which is interesting because all Violet's ever known is negativity and violence and destruction from being at war. And so it's such an interesting take on examining Violet as a human, because she's kind of struggling to regain her humanity after having lost it in the war. And as she's working to become an auto memory doll, she's slowly gaining back her humanity and her ability to communicate with others and have a sense of emotion and love and understanding. And so it's been really interesting so far. So we're on episode 4. After this episode, I've been told that there's an OVA, a special that takes place between episodes 4 and 5, and that it's important to watch the OVA. Even though the OVA came out after the season was over, everybody's like, oh, it's between episodes 4 and 5, you need to watch it then. And it's like, okay, cool. So my plan is, after this episode, next week we'll have the OVA, and then we'll come back and watch episode 5. And I found out, thankfully, thanks to some commenters on here, that the one movie that came out in 2019 is on Netflix that I can watch for Violet. And then there's a second movie, and hopefully it probably won't be out by the time I finish this reaction, but hopefully the second Violet Evergarde movie will come out later this year, maybe this winter, and we can watch it as well. Because I really like this series so far. I like not only how gorgeous it is to just sit and stare at, like it's just so beautiful, but I love that it's just such a calm, beautiful story that doesn't have to, for all the war and violence that you see in the flashbacks and everything, it's all still very somber and restrained, and I like that a lot. It's not over the top, it's not grisly, it's realistic, but it's also very beautiful to watch and just kind of sit down and soak it all in. And so I've been going back and rewatching the episodes after I'm done recording and doing my reaction, just to go back and look at all the tiny details. Like, the amount of detail these people have put with Kiwani with animating this is incredible. Like, just the lines on the face and the little seams in a leaf, and just the tiniest things that you think you take for granted, and then you go back and rewatch it and it's stunning. So yeah, so there's that. And I almost cried last episode, so that's following the trend with this series. But it's so damn, yeah, this show, I was like, just when you think you're not going to get any flashbacks with Gilbert and her, you get the flashback to the very end about naming. And there were surprisingly a lot of connections between Gilbert and her this episode that I want to talk about with this. But man, to be honest, I hadn't been on board with Iris's character at first because she seemed a little snotty and like she was just, not impressed with Violet or not concerned. But then we finally get the full story with her character. She is the small town girl that went to the big city to make a name for herself and has found success being an auto memory doll, in that she's in the company, but she doesn't have any commissions or anything. She's just doing busy work. So it's like her dream isn't fully realized. And being from a rural small town myself, can totally relate to Iris. So now I'm like, I totally get what Iris is going through. And I could relate to her a lot in this episode. I was like, oh girl, know exactly what you're going through. So she has the crazy outfit, all the fancy shoes, she's looking the part of being the auto memory doll, but she clearly has the necklace and stuff from back home, and being able to go home and see her family and everything. And then of course she trips and hurts her and sprains her wrist. And I was trying to look when she falls down the stairs, watching that, and she trips, and then she clearly hits her arm there. Or was it, but no, I was trying to think if maybe Violet caused her to sprain her wrist, but no, that wasn't the case because she grabbed her with the other arm, and so this arm must have been the one that got injured. Yeah. So they talk about voting real quickly. They establish that this will be the first election since the war started, and the House of Lords making moves. I'm sure the House of Commons candidates are desperate. So there's a House of Lords and a House of Commons. So that we're trying to establish a little bit of world building there. To get some letters sent out for that. So that's interesting. And so the two of them go off on their journey together. And I find this really interesting because Violet, of course, would know the basics about all the little towns and stuff in the kingdom, because as a military person, they need to know like what the significance of each place is on a map. So she probably knew that like the town was only really good for dairy and agriculture. And of course, Iris is like, hey, don't put us down like that. Like, yeah, we don't have a lot, but it's, but as you see later on in the episode, the area is beautiful and this is beautiful countryside. And Violet's like, well, there's nothing wrong with there not being anything big there. She's like, when something of value is there, it attracts crime and trouble. And they do some world building here where Violet says that northern Leidenschlachtlich had iron and copper ore deposits. And the iron and core deposits enticed the Garderic Empire to attack. And that caused the war. So I like the idea that Violet has from her military experience, this knowledge about, why wars start when there's something of value. And then Iris, has that awkward conversation when she talks about her uncle that volunteered to fight, but her aunt was against it. So he thankfully ended up not going. And then I'm like, Violet's the worst person to talk to because she like lost her limbs in the war, but Violet doesn't get it. She doesn't get what the implication of it is. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. And Violet's like, well, you're not responsible for that, so it's fine. And she's so literal. It's just, oh my gosh. But I totally understand. I totally understand where Iris is coming from, in that when you grow up and you sometimes move away from home and you want to impress your family by making it seem like you've made a name for yourself. And she doesn't want to admit that she's kind of been working this 9-to-5 job and hasn't really made as much success as she was bragging that she would. And then, of course, the parents, they're like, well, you're only child, you're back home. How about you quit being a doll and just settle down and get married here and stay with the family? And I can totally relate to that. And then, of course, there's Eamon Snow, which, for the record, girl, you've got a lot of suitors in your neighborhood that are all very handsome looking men. Like, it's cool if you don't want to get married. You don't have to at all. But I'm just saying, there's not trolls in your village. I'm like, you shouldn't want for nothing. But I like that Iris is like, I'm not looking for that now. Like, I want to be successful and be a doll. And like that's really, really cool. And then poor Violet, she's so literal still that she's making small strides, like she's making small little baby steps towards gaining that human emotion back, but it's in tiny steps. And she's still very, very literal and takes it to heart about the birthday invitations. And then we find out that Eamon Snow rejected her and that she loved him. And I can totally relate to to Iris for that, because I had the same thing happen that Iris did. I'm sure we all have had, where you really liked somebody and then you confessed and they were like, oh, I just see you as a friend. And it's gutting. It's horrible. If you've ever had that happen, it's the worst feeling, because like she tells Violet, and like Violet finally figures out, it's like, oh, it takes courage to tell someone you love them. And when that's unrequited, when that doesn't get returned to you, yeah, the last person you want to see is that person. And I'm amazed he showed up. I'm like, dude, I mean, he's handsome. He's a very nice looking guy and he seems like a nice person. But I'm like, Eamon, if you knew the girl confessed to you, why would you show up when you knew that she confessed that she loved you and you didn't return it back? Like, dude, that was kind of like, read the room. Maybe you shouldn't have showed up at the party. I don't know. I was just like, when you found out that she confessed to him and that was something really intimate and took a lot of courage for her to do, and then he turned her down, even though they were childhood friends, I'm like, maybe you should have talked to her before you showed up. I don't know. It was just so awkward, but I totally relate to her struggle in that. And I like that it seems like no matter what she wears, the necklace is like from something back home that she takes with her. And I really like that a lot. That's really cool. But yeah, Eamon, he's like the last person she wants to see. And then her like holding herself up. Which seems like a juvenile thing to do, but when you're in that situation, like, and she just clearly doesn't feel good, it's like that, why would you want to be around? And she didn't want the party like that to begin with. So she seems like she's somebody that would have like maybe 3 or 4 people there and not have anybody else show up. So it's, it's like, what do you do? But what's interesting about all of this is that as Iris is telling Violet about the fact that she told him, she's like, I told him I love you, and he didn't return it, and how awful it felt. And it's so heartbreaking because in that moment, Violet's talking to her, and I get to it. Oh my gosh. Oh, where is that moment at? And so she left after that moment to become a doll and forget about him. One needs a lot of courage to say the words, I love you. Especially if the feeling isn't mutual and it makes you want to flee. I wonder if it was the same for the Major then. So the question is, does Violet think that the Major... I wonder if Violet is wondering if the Major knew that she loved him back, or if she even knows what that means. Because it seems like Violet doesn't quite understand what the term love means to begin with. So how could she say I love you back to him if she doesn't even understand? So I wonder if the rest of this episode, or the rest of this series, if she's going to try to construct a letter where she tells him that she loves him. If she loves him, I think that she does. She just doesn't know what that means or what. I think that she knows she has feelings for the Major and she cares about him, but I don't know if she knows if it's love or not. And I wonder if she's going to try to write a letter to express that to him. But she realizes in this moment, talking to Iris, that it took a lot of courage for him to tell her that he loves her. And there was that fear that he probably had. He probably knew that he's like, if I tell this woman that I love her and it's not mutual, he's taking a risk with that. And I need to see that scene extended again now. It's just, oh my gosh, no. Ah! I need to see it. I need to see it. But yeah, so she's realizing that it takes a lot of courage to say I love you, and that the Major was going through those exact same emotions that Iris was when he told her that. And so I'm just like, she's taking one step closer. And of course, everybody she encounters is like, who's the Major? Who's this guy? And she's like, oh, my superior officer. And she's like, I became a doll so I could understand what he meant when he said I love you. And Iris is like, oh my God, this guy confessed to you? What do we do with that? And the Major provided his love to her, who only knew the military. That was the courage, because he probably knew that she didn't understand. She's trying to figure out what he meant. Show. So good. And I love the little nuances that this series that Kiwani does with like the animation on each individual person, because like Iris, she messes with her toes and her feet, and she steps a certain way and like holds her feet a certain way when she steps off the bed. Like, it's all so individualized and so neat. And then of course she wants to write the apology letter, make sure it's heartfelt and polite. And I like that Violet's getting to the point where she can write these letters and it's more natural. And when when the mom read the letter, it did sound a lot better than even the letter with Luculia. So you could tell that slowly but surely, through all these little subtle gestures, Violet is evolving as a character. And that's so interesting, that she's slowly kind of opening up and slowly warming up, and the humanity is like trickling back in tiny droplets. And that's so neat. That's so fascinating, because it's nothing unnatural and it doesn't seem forced. It's very in character. And the humor of it at the end, where she's like, I'm going to charge you. That'll cost you a fee. It's like, yes, it's like getting some humor embedded in there, Violet. Like, yes, absolutely. I love it. And then giving her the bouquet of irises. And I thought those were irises, but I wasn't 100% sure. And I was like, I really hope those are irises. Because I was about to say it in the reaction, and then I was like, I'm not 100% sure. And here's the thing. Violet wants to know. She's like, I want to know, was the letter a success? Because in the previous episode, back in episode 3, that was her struggle, was that the woman, the instructor, was like, this is not a letter. And it's a military report. It's not a letter. And so when she finally wrote that letter for Luculia's brother, it was very short. It was only like 2 sentences. So it was a letter, but barely. And so this time she's like, did I write a letter? And Iris is like, well, didn't you see the reactions? And then instantly realizes that Violet can't read emotions easily on people's faces. And she's like, oh, sorry. Yeah, they liked it. And then she's like, did I write a good letter? And she's like, yeah, it was a good letter. So, Violet's slowly building up and working towards writing this letter to Gilbert. She's just not there yet. But I'm just waiting for it. I'm waiting for her to sit down and write out her feelings to him. I'm waiting for that moment. And then, yeah, even Iris says, why are you talking like that? Like, kind of very robotic, militaristic, objective. And then Violet kind of loosens up a little bit and is like, oh, those flowers. And she's like, yeah, they're irises. And there's that whole big field of it. And it's gorgeous. And then, yeah, we get a flashback. And we don't know exactly how old she is. I mean, we assume that Gilbert's probably in his late teens, early 20s. And she's probably like 13, maybe. 13 or 14, if that. And he just looks down on her. And she doesn't say anything. She's just like a doll. He's like, would it be okay if I gave you a name then? And it's so sweet. He looks over to the cannon, and how symbolic that by this like machine of war under it are two violets. Just randomly there. Like, that's so symbolic, this little, and the light shining on it. And then, yeah, he just looks up at her. Violet. And the way he whispers it, it's like, ah! Gilbert! I have a feeling you'll grow into the name when you're older. Ah! Show! Don't be a tool. Become someone that matches with their name. And it's so good. It's so good that her name is Violet, like being a flower. Don't become a weapon, don't be a tool. This is a really low-key episode, and I feel it went by so fast. This episode was over so quickly. I was like, when we were getting back on the train at the end, I'm like, are we already over? Is this episode already over? Like, it went by so fast. I swear. So there's not much else to say about this episode, except we learned about Iris and her family, and Violet slowly edging more and more towards gaining back some humanity. But I'm really curious. The OVA is up next chronologically, so I'm going to watch the OVA next. So I'm very curious to know what all is going to go on with that, what we're going to get involved with the OVA. I've heard a couple people have commented that it gives us more background on Violet. I want more Gilbert scenes, y'all. Y'all are teasing with Gilbert. I want more Gilbert and Violet scenes because I need it. So I want more of them. So I hope maybe in the OVA we get that. But that'll be next week. We'll do the OVA, and then after that we'll start back with episode 5. So we'll just take a little detour, right? But y'all, this episode was really good. It was very compact, very concise and contained, but it's just giving us more Violet slowly blossoming and coming out of her shell. So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, what you all thought of the episode, what you all thought about old Violet and Iris, but please no spoilers. But I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, and in the meantime, I'll talk to y'all again soon with more Violet Evergarden. Bye. Good. So I'm really curious to know what we get into with episode 4. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and start the episode. But let's do this, shall we? We are going to start episode 4 of Violet Evergarden here. Let me get this all queued up here in 3, 2, 1. Let's go.